Hello everybody, I'm Dan Murrell here with my review of Superman, which is one of the summer's most hotly anticipated and strangely already most debated movies. Now before I get started, I just want to say that as with all of my other reviews, I will not be giving specific spoilers about the plot of this movie, but there will be references to moments that have already been included in the marketing materials and general non-specific discussion about the story. So if that's more than you want to know, then you may want to wait and watch this review later. But again, I will not be talking about anything specific that hasn't already been revealed. Superman is, of course, the high-stakes kickoff of James Gunn's DC universe, and it's hard to remember the last time that a movie had so much riding on it, from the future of multiple superhero franchises to the well-being of an entire studio, all as small groups of die-hard Gunn fans and die-hard Snyder fans fight a war that's already been raging for years, despite the reality that these two guys seemingly don't really have any beef with each other. But underneath all of that is the fact that this is also just a movie, one movie, which needs to succeed or fail on its own terms. And listen, James Gunn is obviously and openly a fan of Superman the character, and he brings that love to the screen. There's no fake enthusiasm here. He obviously has a very solid idea of who this version of Superman should be and what this version of the DC universe looks like and will be, but that isn't always translated to the screen. David Corenswet takes over the role of the Man of Steel, and the good news is that he's very well suited to the part. We pick up the story a few years after Superman has revealed himself to the world, but he's still a superhero that's learning, and the movie depicts a critical turning point in both his relationship with humanity and his rivalry with Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor, who has been searching for years to find a way to defeat what he sees as a hostile alien invader. Superman is also trying to manage his relationship with Rachel Brosnahan's Lois Lane, and the two have to navigate their lives with Superman as both Lois's boyfriend and the world's most important news story. Now, you may have noticed that I'm referencing a lot of pivotal moments in Superman's history in the past tense, and that's because Gunn has said that he's not concerned with establishing or re-establishing much of the Superman mythology. This movie feels much more like an introduction to Gunn's DC universe than a true Superman story. In addition to the usual Superman cast of characters, we're also introduced to the Justice Gang, consisting of Nathan Fillion's Guy Gardner, Isabella Merced's Hawkgirl, and Eddie Gathegi's Mr. Terrific, as well as Anthony Kerrigan as the shape-shifting Metamorpho, and of course, Krypto, Superman's canine companion, who has become a centerpiece of the movie's marketing campaign. This is not a Superman origin story, or even really a pure Superman story. This is a lot more like Volume 2 of a DC annual featuring characters who are already established in Volume 1. And if you're looking for that volume, well, it's on back order. Now, there are two groups of people to whom I don't think any praise or negative criticism of this movie is going to make much of a difference. DC fans who just want to see these characters on screen and don't care as much about the story behind the movie, and the people that have already decided that they hate this movie. There's enough to love and enough to criticize in the film that I think that anybody can walk away with what they want to walk away with. James Gunn also seems well aware of this, especially because he has a scene where social media hate about Superman is being generated by a literal army of angry monkeys behind a keyboard. He's leaning heavily into winning over people who are already fans of Superman and a lot of the deeper DC mythology, and I think that many of them are going to love this film. But he also seems to have wholly abandoned the people in the middle, and I count myself among that group, who might be fans of Superman and some of his previous depictions in film and television and in comics, but are looking for a reason to love this Superman. Zack Snyder's Superman films, particularly Batman v Superman, were criticized for speedrunning Superman's development, skipping major parts of the story that focus on Superman in order to get to the broader universe. And I think that James Gunn makes a lot of the same decisions here. He's openly said that he's not interested in retreading familiar ground, and I'm not saying that I need to see yet another version of a baby Kal-El being put into a rocket and blasted to Earth, but this Superman feels like it takes place in a world where audience love for and knowledge of these versions of the characters is already a given. So when you ask questions like, why do Superman and Lois Lane love each other? Well, it doesn't matter because they're already together. How did Superman become Lex Luthor's mortal enemy? Well, it doesn't matter. We'll just throw in a couple of lines here and there to explain it. Who exactly are Guy Gardner and Hawkgirl and Mr. Terrific? Again, it doesn't matter because they're already there. I get where James Gunn is coming from to an extent. A lot of these things have been done in other movies or explained over decades of comic book storytelling, but I do think that there is a base level of things that we as an audience have to be shown independent of those other media in order to fully embrace this version of Superman. And on that account, I think James Gunn falls short. Superman is a movie that's made for existing fans without a whole lot of thought given to winning over new fans. I mean, within 15 minutes, Superman and Lois Lane are having an extensive debate about the ethics of Superman's role in geopolitics, which is a plot point that's been extensively covered in previous films. And I found myself wondering how that's going to land for people who are still finding their footing in this version of the DC universe, or even for kids who are seeing their first Superman movie. How effective is seeing Superman at the bottom if we've never seen him at the top? David Corenswet, as I said before, I think was a good choice for the role. And like Henry Cavill before him, I think he does a better job at being Superman than the movie does of writing Superman. For all of the complaints about Cavill's Superman being too weighed down and anguished, I think a lot of the same things could be said about Corenswet's. But he does a good job of establishing a return to the good golly Superman that Richard Donner and Christopher Reeve brought to the screen nearly 50 years ago. Gunn makes sure to punctuate the movie with great moments of iconography and positivity, possibly to help head off the too dark criticisms about Snyder's interpretation. And this Superman is concerned with saving people and other creatures to such a degree that it often feels like a direct response to the complaints about the DCEU version. I also liked Rachel Brosnahan as Lois Lane, who captures a lot of the brashness that led Margot Kidder to success in this role. She's a convincing ace reporter who will press even Superman on the facts if it means getting a good story, and I think that she has good chemistry with David Corenswet, but there's so much other stuff that the movie's concerned with that I don't think she gets as much time to shine as she should. I think past the first act, Lois isn't really very consequential to the movie at all. Eddie Gathegi as Mr. Terrific is also a standout as the member of the Justice Gang with the biggest part to play. If this team had been given its own movie, I have no doubt that he would be the breakout character, and he delivers a lot of the movie's humor, which is another James Gunn superhero movie trademark. I was a little less sold on Nicholas Holt's Lex Luthor. He makes some very specific choices as an actor, and at times he's deliciously evil and sardonic, but I think he's also maybe the biggest example of my problems with the movie. I understand that he's Lex Luthor, but I don't know him. His character isn't really given enough time to develop, and in that vacuum, I think a lot of what Holt is doing feels like overacting. I feel like I'm seeing him play a version of the character that I should already know and love, but that I don't. Characters like Beck Bennett's Steve Lombard or Skylar Gisando's Jimmy Olsen or Lex Luthor, who have some good moments in the film and would have had much more time to shine in a story that was more focused, are pushed to the margins in favor of more new characters, more creatures and environments, more reveals and twists. But more isn't always better. For example, there's one massive change to the Superman canon that I think could have been the premise of its own movie. It's the kind of thing that I think is going to completely polarize people, but it opens up some interesting possibilities, some really interesting possibilities. I'd have been much more interested if the movie had taken the time to develop that story further at the expense of one less character or one less set piece. James Gunn has an encyclopedic knowledge of DC history, which is great for the role that he's in. But he's only playing to the crowd that already shares that knowledge. This is going to be treated warmly by those that he's super serving, but I think that it's also going to alienate some others. It left me out in the cold a few times. And I think that this also means that a lot of people are going to say that this movie was made for true fans of DC, and it's likely that I won't be counted among that group, and I'll be told that this movie just isn't made for me. But the way to keep a fan base healthy is to keep growing it, not just super serving the ones that you already have. I don't think James Gunn is coming from an exclusionary place, But I think that he is a little short-sighted in his vision of how to reintroduce Superman and set up this overall universe. I understand that he's trying to sell a lot in this one movie, but it almost feels like a fire sale. Everything must show, instead of trying to sell us on Superman and letting things grow from there. I legitimately don't know where most people are going to fall on this movie. I might be vastly in the minority here. As I said, there are a lot of things to like. But for me, Superman just didn't work. I'm a fan of the character. I love the Christopher Reeve version. I read the comics growing up. You don't have to convince me that Superman is great, but you do have to show me why in 2025 I should be invested in this version. I guess I was kind of hoping for this movie to be like a steak dinner, packed with flavor and a reminder of what great food can be. And instead, James Gunn took me to McDonald's, which is full of familiar flavor, not necessarily unpleasant, and marketed on an established name, and said, "Come on, baby, you know I love you." He seems to be taking for granted that we're already on board with what he's doing. And I certainly wasn't against Gunn taking over DC. I didn't walk in with any bias for or against his plans, but I didn't walk out convinced that the DC universe is on the right track. Even when you remove the canon elements of DC, I think that this is an unevenly plotted and paced movie that also delivers some outstanding moments and sequences, especially when the focus stays on Superman and his relationships with the people in his life, like his Earth parents, the Kents. It's just that those moments were too few and far between. Instead, we get a lot of what has been the pitfall of comic book movies in the cinematic universe era, which is tons of world building and looking to the future at the expense of right now. And I think that this was the flaw behind having Gunn both run the DC universe and act as the creative lead for this first film. He's established all of the mythology and all of the backstory in his head, but he delivered a movie that forgets to make us love it as much as he does. I find it ironic that Gunn's Superman is considered by many to be a counterpoint to Zack Snyder's Superman films, only for the two different versions to share a lot of the same flaws. Because once again, we have a Superman movie that spends too much time introducing an expanded roster of DC characters at the expense of core ones, a Superman who's largely angry and anguished, a complex plot revolving around whether Superman has too much power, and a Lex Luthor who's maybe a bit too eccentric for the character's own good. 12 years after the debut of Man of Steel, it's time to meet the new boss of the DC universe, same as the old boss. Superman is such a scattered movie that it's tough to say where it falls on my personal scale, but the question that I always ask myself is, would I be excited to watch this movie again right now? And the truth is, I wouldn't really. I'm going to be revisiting the movie before I do my spoiler review, but as of this moment, and I do truly wish this wasn't the case, I have to say that I'm not a fan of this movie. Maybe that will change with time and more digestion, but I'm also not convinced that Superman is going to be the runaway success that DC is looking for. So those are my thoughts on Superman, and given that the review embargo just lifted, I'm excited to dive into what other critics thought of the movie. But what about you? Does this change your feelings about the movie at all? Are you as excited or not excited about the movie hitting theaters this weekend as you were before this review? Let me know down in the comments below, and as always, stay tuned right here for the latest in movie news, reviews, box office, and more. I'll have my spoiler review for Superman up here on the channel after it hits theaters, and I'm also trying to launch my live show this week, so keep an eye out for that. Until next time, though, stay safe, and I'll see you then. Bye.